All right, section 2-1, starting chapter 2 here. We're getting into integers and absolute value. And a few things that we need to recognize here, just vocabulary, is the word integers. Something we've talked about, but integers are a group of numbers. So all the numbers you see on here, where it says -5, -4, -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those are all integers. So if you keep going past +5, 6, 7, 8, all the way to infinity, and if you go downward past -5 to the left, you get -6, -7, all the way to negative infinity. Those are all the integers. So notice there's no fractions, no decimals in integers. They're just regular numbers. The numbers that you know, positive or negative, and 0 is also an integer. Alright, so you've got the negatives to the left and you've got the positives to the right. Anything on the left of a number on its right is always smaller. So the numbers on the right are always bigger, numbers on the left are always smaller. And so example number 1 on page 78, we've got 3 different ones. It wants you to write an integer. So when it says 500 feet below sea level, you're saying that that's at -500 since it's below sea level. B, a temperature increase of 12 degrees. That would be represented by +12. Or you could just say 12. Don't have to have the plus sign. And then a loss of $240. That would be represented by a -240. Those are all integers. Notice there's no decimals or fractions in there. Alright, and page 79, example number 2, partway down the page, we've got a few different numbers here. Part A on number 2 says write 2 inequalities involving -3 and 4. So the way you'd write that is, we can say an inequality is a greater than or less than sign. We know that -3 is less than 4. That's one inequality. And then the other way we can write this is completely backwards. 4 is greater than -3. So those would be each of your answers for writing 2 inequalities. And then on part B it says to replace the circle with less than, greater than, or equal to. And if -5 is down here, -1 is right there. I know that -5 is less than -1. So that would go in there. And so example 3, we also see on page 79, down at the bottom, says the top 10 fourth round scores of the 2004 LPGA Championship Tournament were the following: 0, +1, -5, -2, -1, +4, +2, +3, +5, and -3. Order these from least to greatest. So I'm going to start with the largest negative numbers. So the largest negative number is -5. That would be my least. Next biggest negative is -3. Next largest negative, -2, -1. So the bigger the negative, the smaller that it is. And then after we're done with negative, we go to 0. Cross that one out. And then we just go right up the line. You guys know how to do this. We've got +1, +2, 3, 4, 5. Running out of room. 4, 5. There is your answer. And so a vocabulary term on page 80 that we need to know and understand is the word absolute value. So we have something here, if you're looking at the chart, it says that numbers that are the same distance from 0 have the same absolute value. So -5 and +5, they're not the same number just by themselves, but if we take the absolute value with these big long lines, notice the lines are larger than the 5. It shouldn't look like a 1 and be written right beside. It should be higher and lower than the number 5 and -5. That's how you make the absolute value brackets. Well, what we know is that the absolute value of -5 is equal to the absolute value of 5, which all that means is the distance from negative 5 to 0 is the same as the distance from positive 5 to 0. They both have a distance from 0 of positive 5. So what is the absolute value of negative 5? Well, it is 5. What is the absolute value of positive 5? Still 5. Now in this problem, example 4, this is just wanting you to evaluate, and the word evaluate means find the value. Evaluate each expression. So the first one we have here is the absolute value of negative 8. In other words, how far is this number away from 0? Negative 8 from 0 is a distance of 8. So the absolute value of negative 8 is 8. Now down here, this is a little bit different. So this one has two absolute value brackets. These are kind of like parentheses. If we were doing PEMDAS, you still follow PEMDAS. So we would do parentheses first. Well, 9 is in absolute value, so I'm going to underline it, drop that down. What is the absolute value of 9? 9. And then we also have the absolute value of negative 7. Again, like parentheses, the absolute value of negative 7 is again positive. Hopefully you're noticing that the answer for absolute value is always positive. But if we're doing PEMDAS here, we still drop this plus sign down, and then we just continue to solve. The absolute value symbols are done. 9 plus 7 is 16. Alright, and I want to make sure I do an example here of a problem that's not in the examples, and this is number 51 on page 82. So this is the problem, and just going back to what I just taught you, you have to treat this problem like it's PEMDAS. Alright, so the absolute value brackets that you see here and in here, they're parentheses. So we have to do those first. Alright, so I'm going to drop down my negative sign over here, but I'm going to keep my absolute value. So what we're going to do here is I don't make everything in here positive. What I do is take negative 6 plus 1. What is negative 6 plus 1? Well, you may not know that answer, but negative 6 plus 1 is actually negative 5. But notice it's still in absolute value brackets. Now you might disagree with me there, but I'll show you in the coming weeks and days why that is. And then this minus sign should drop down. And then I've got this absolute value bracket with 5 minus 6, which is negative 1. Alright, so I still have negative absolute value of negative 5 minus absolute value of negative 1. Now I can still do my parentheses step here. Alright, absolute value of negative 5 is 5, but I'm still going to drop down this minus sign. Absolute value of negative 1 is positive 1, but I'm still going to drop down this minus sign here. Now I'm on my last step. I've already done parentheses, I've done inside the parentheses, I've done the absolute value. Now I just go ahead, this is my last step, negative 5 minus 1. If you lost $5 and then you lost $1, you would have lost 6 altogether. Negative 5 minus 1 is negative 6. It is not negative 4. Again, I'll show you that later on why that is. Alright then, example 5, the one we're doing here, it says the absolute value of x minus 3 if x equals negative 5. So we're going to evaluate this. The first thing that we're going to do is plug in x equals negative 5 into here. So I'm going to rewrite it. Absolute value. Instead of writing x, I write what x is now equal to, which is negative 5, and then I continue to write down the rest of the problem, minus 3. Alright, and then all we're doing is solving. Okay, so parentheses first, absolute value of negative 5 is positive 5, and then again drop down my minus 3. Then that step becomes pretty easy. 5 minus 3 is 2. Alright, that is it. Good luck with the homework.